Hi there, this is Marty LaRue, and I am here with Tom with the Daisy Foundation. Tom,
Yep.
welcome aboard. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello there. Hi. Thank you. Great to be with you tonight. Yeah, I'd just like to say a little bit about the Data Foundation and what we stand for. Essentially, we were set up in September 2015, beg your pardon, and we're growing to evolve and become something of which we want to help people, mainly in Japan, but generally all over the world as well. Um, Mutant Daisies was set up initially as a basic journalistic platform to spread awareness to like-minded professionals, individuals, and people of the media about the triple meltdowns and explosions over at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station in Japan. And since then, the concept of Mutant Daisies has evolved into a movement or a foundation concept, if you like, against the current status quo of the Fukushima information suppression and manipulation coming out of the Japanese government and by TEPCO, and indeed the international nuclear industry and the wider mainstream media as a whole as well. Now, the concept is going to develop and evolve over time, but to put it into a quick, concise statement, what we want to do is to raise awareness primarily about Fukushima, because we believe raising awareness is critical to highlighting and dealing with the challenges and threats posed by the Fukushima disaster, not only to the Japanese children and wider population, but also to the environment and the future generations of this planet. We are all, we all are, after all, guardians of this earth until our children inherit it from us. And we are currently on course to leave a radioactively contaminated earth as this generation's legacy. And we here at Mutant Daisies believe that urgent and direct action and campaigning must be taken to educate and inform the wider public of what is happening. We believe that educating and informing the masses is very, very important so that the complexities and consequences of nuclear power production and indeed nuclear waste are properly understood and the associated risks are properly evaluated.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I'm really excited to learn more about the Daisy Foundation. And did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on and go on. I didn't know quite how long you wanted me to talk for in relation to it, but what we feel is that the situation at Fukushima is not being reported accurately or truthfully, and as a result of that, the wider public of the world do not fully appreciate the true scale and implications of what is actually going on over there, and just why it's so important that everybody understands. Unfortunately, in general, the average Joe public of today will believe what they watch from the 6 o'clock news to be true and accurate. And if, for example, Fukushima isn't covered as a news article, then people will generally believe or assume that everything must be fine and everything's okay, and that there is no cause for concern. Of course, we believe and we know that the reality of the situation could not be further from the truth. There is a very big problem over in Fukushima. I would actually regard it to be the biggest nuclear catastrophe mankind has ever witnessed.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I don't want to sound too alarmist, but the thing is that we're now at a stage where we cannot continue to ignore the realities of the situation. We feel that, in general, the average person of today in the westernized world, they've lost the inclination or the urge and desire to research news and facts for themselves. I'm not talking about everyone. I'm just talking about as a generalization. People will they'll use quick outlets for their quick fill of world events and current affairs. So whether or not that be the TV, radio, or internet, they maybe have a quick look online and fill their boots, so to speak, and then that'll be it. Whereas you need to dig deeper into today's world. Unfortunately, is the case, and there are set agendas and there are set manifestos, if you like, to hide the realities of the truth from the public, because unfortunately again, it's not a conspiracy theorist as such. It's more a reality that
Yeah, reality check.
that's right. It's more a reality check, because unfortunately our governments seem to think that we the people are unable to handle the realities of life and events and problems that we have. So part of what mutant daisies is to actually have a level playing field of true information, so we can educate the people and the public as to what is really going on.
Awesome. Awesome. So we wanted to put together some information for you guys to learn about a snippet of information about what's going on. Now let's see if I can get my slides to advance, and it doesn't look like I'm having much luck in that department. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, let's advance to slide 1. Tom, did you have any additional information that you wanted to share with our viewers at this time?
Uh, I have so much. I have so much, but I appreciate we only have limited time here. I mean, the main initial hard-hitting facts that I'd like the public and our people, our audience, to sort of grasp on this show is that ever since the 11th of March 2011, Fukushima Daiichi, which is the nuclear power plant that we're referring to here, has been leaking as a minimum 300 tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean a day.
Well, that's just what they're admitting to, really.
Yeah, correct. That is the publicly admitted figure. So the reality is probably higher.
Yeah, no doubt.
But just that one fact alone. I mean, I could go on. I could give you an awful lot more. But if we just start slowly, and if you can just initially try and, not you, but if we can initially try and get people to just appreciate that sheer volume of water a day, and it probably is more than that, but even just 300 tons a day into the Pacific since March 2011, that's 5 years, that's 365 days a year for 5 years, and we can't stop it, they can't stop it, and that, as a starting point, as a start-off point, if we use that, hopefully that should get people's attention.
Well, the thing that really gets my goat is that you'll have a lot of these, like, for instance, the Blue Planet Society, Greenpeace, and other organizations like that deliberately provide these articles that misdirect the problem that's going on in the Pacific. Overfishing. I just saw a report recently about some whales that washed up on the beach in Germany, and they looked at the contents of their stomach, and they had a bunch of plastic in there, like one of them had swallowed a car bumper or something. But why, nobody's really taking a look at why are these whales ingesting plastic. Well, it's because their food supply is gone. The plankton, the krill,
Plankton, that's right.
and and let's not even talk about the issue that arises with plankton, because plankton produces the lion's share of the oxygen in our atmosphere.
That's right.
So there's, it's just a cascade of events, and there seldom seems to be any type of follow-up regarding these beached whales, sea lions, porpoises, where they do they take a biopsy or they do an autopsy, and they admit that there's radiation in their bodies. As far as I'm concerned, every animal that washes up on shore in the Pacific should be treated like it is a biological radiation hazard.
Absolutely right. I'm not even aware that they even test the carcasses that wash up on the coastline for radiation or any form of it. Are they? I don't know. I mean, I'm looking from London, so I'm not quite sure. But from every report that I read, I don't see them dissecting or testing for any form of radiological contamination. Do they?
Well, honestly, there was one article that I read, and I don't remember where it was, if it was in the UK or if it was in the washed up on shore in Germany. I believe it was Germany, but I'm not 100% sure, where some porpoises had washed up on shore, and they actually did an autopsy, and they found evidence of radioactive contamination in the lungs and one other organ. I can't remember. But yeah, there was one article over the last 5 years, and I can't I don't recall where it was, when I read it or
I
anything,
can
but
remember that in the
yeah.
UK we had about over 14 carcasses wash up around the UK and Germany, so that's probably when it was. It was probably about 10 months ago, and I do remember that.
Okay, all right. I'm not sure. It might have been before then. I'm thinking it might not have been in the States when I read it, but yeah.
There
But
is certainly a significant problem arising and going on, which I don't think is being properly assessed.
no, it's not. It's not. In California and all the way down from, Alaska on down to the Baja Peninsula and beyond, even down into Peru. In my book, The Little Rad Book, Cesium 137, Part 1, it was written like about 2 years ago, and what I was writing about, everything has exponentially increased. It's just been magnified. And
It's horrendous. It is
yeah,
absolutely horrendous.
yeah. At that time, there was like over 400 sea lions washed up on the shore in Peru. I mean,
No questions asked.
yeah, that's unheard of. Yeah, exactly. There was no uh, testing, and if there was, it wasn't being released to the general public.
Okay, okay. Well, what is beer then? What is beer?
Okay, so BEER is a committee on the biological effects of ionizing radiation. We're going to refer to BEER in some of these other slides that I put together. And you can see that it's the National Research Council, it's in the US, and it's a committee that has published several reports. And you can see them listed on your screen. All of them have to do with radiation, ionizing, low-level ionizing radiation,
Yeah.
and then the health effects of radon and other internally deposited alpha emitters. And I wrote a blog post on my website, nuclearworld.net, about what happens when you swallow an alpha emitter. It's also on YouTube. You can do a search on that. Also, health effects of low levels of ionizing radiation. It turns out that a gentleman, a doctor by the name of Abraham, or is it Abraham Pelkow? He was a Canadian scientist, and I believe back in the 60s, what he did was he took a petri dish and he exposed a cell to low level radiation, like at 1 rad, right? And he found that over a period of time that the cell just like ruptured. The cell membrane just ruptured when it was exposed to this low level of radiation, less than 1 rad. And so a lot of the research that about radiation was done on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors of the atomic bomb. And if there's any Japanese people there, on behalf of the American government, I apologize for that horrible atrocity that we perpetrated upon your country. Even though it was long before I was born, I just feel horrible about it. So they're saying that low-level radiation, being exposed to low levels of ionizing radiation on a cellular level, is worse than have like one quick high-level atomic blast. That's what and when they did the research, the researchers were surprised to find that. However, the hormesis gang will insist that a little bit of radiation is good for you, but
Yeah,
that's
right.
obviously not true. And and then again, they're talking here about radon, and then we have health risks from exposure to low levels of ionizing radiation in phase 1 and phase 2. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention because we are going to be referring to that in a little short bit. Okay. Most people know this, Tom, that nuclear radiation increases cancer risk. And I have some quotes here. Every amount of radiation exposure increases your risk of cancer. and there is no safe level of radiation. And
That's absolutely correct. There is no safe level of radiation.
exactly, exactly. And radiation is cumulative, and different isotopes have affinity for different organs and tissues in the body. And this, of course, is from this website here. Um, and uh, and he's saying that as far as the radiation released from Fukushima, Hirsch says experts do not have a good handle on the amount, which is like, goes with what we were saying previously. It's like, what was that amount again, Tom? Do you recall? It was like 30 million or something.
That's right. Yeah. From the amount of radiation released from Fukushima.
Yeah, into being dumped. And I mean, they're just
300 tons a day, 300 tons of water a day. I mean, the atmospheric releases of radiation, I don't even think we can have an accurate estimate on, because basically TEPCO still haven't really properly announced. All the information coming out of TEPCO has been untrustworthy. It hasn't been independently verified. So, for example, we don't know whether or not the spent fuel pools of Unit 4 have gone, or whether or not half of them have gone, or whether or not they are still intact. But certainly, I can refer to the water, because that's publicly, that's the groundwater, because that's one of the publicly emitted facts that TEPCO have given, and that's 300 tons of groundwater, highly radioactive groundwater a day going into the Pacific. So that's one of the figures I do work from and use.
Right, and and we don't know what the mix of radioactive isotopes. I mean, there's plutonium-239, which has a half-life of like 24,000 years. So multiply that times 10, and it's hanging around in the environment for at least 250,000 years, right? Okay, so these quotes were taken from a talk in the Bay Area, this article here, and they're saying that people were motivated to attend the talk because of what happened in Japan, and they were worried about what is going on in the United States. Now, we have, I believe it's something like 12 or maybe more nuclear reactors that are built on the same model, GE model of the Fukushima plant.
Sure.
Okay. And so then we have, this is very interesting. I wanted to bring this to your attention.
And of course, just to interrupt there, the Mark 1 GE models that you're referring to,
yes,
they are the same as the Mark 1 reactors at Fukushima.
Exactly, thank you. I couldn't remember the title of the reactors.
Yeah, no, that's what you're referring to. The 12 in the States is that they are exactly the same Mark 1 build reactors as what's I was going to say, which have critically melted down or exploded over at Fukushima, and which, as a side note, just in case anybody doesn't know, the actual designers of the Mark 1 General Electric reactor that we're referring to here, the designers actually retired, or resigned, should I say, they resigned because they were concerned over the safety capabilities of these reactors. They resigned in 1975 over safety concerns. So this is what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, and there's so many levels. It just goes so deep. Now, I pulled this up on ENE News, if you're not familiar with it. It's a news aggregator that focuses in on radioactive issues, nuclear issues. And this was taken from the Moscow Times, and they found 29 fetuses at a uranium site. And normally I try to avoid these type of gruesome subjects, but what is interesting is that this site is in Kazakhstan, and you never hear about how radioactive Kazakhstan is. Kazakhstan was one of those countries I was looking at going to at some point in time, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't, now that I'm finding out all this information about how contaminated the region is. So what they found is that some factory workers got pregnant. They had stillborn, aborted, abandoned babies with amputated limbs and removed organs, and they were all placed in this um, drum, okay, and and which is sad enough, right? Because these are little human lives, um, but
Well,
the
it's sad and it's, yeah, absolutely, it's incomprehensible, really. But please continue.
it really is. But even the amputated limbs and the fetuses, the dead babies, were radioactive and they posed a danger to others. So they sealed them up and they put them in these jugs and they buried them. And what they did was they used these people in Kazakhstan as human guinea pigs for testing nuclear weapons. And at the time, they were not aware that that radiation caused genetic defects that would carry on through multi generations, through the family, okay, the family's bloodline.
Sure,
And
sure.
this is what he said. Okay, we knew precisely where the radiation was. We knew precisely how much of the different types of radiation that people were being exposed to.
Mm.
They knew what dose the population was receiving. They knew everything. And then what they said here was over the last 15 years, we have thoroughly analyzed all the material. We've made our conclusions and published our research. And now a huge new group has appeared of 250,000 to 270,000 people, and they are the children of parents who had been irradiated.
Oh
And
my goodness,
I know, that's a huge group of people. They're
that's
saying,
enormous.
I know, we thought that everything would go smoothly, that chromosomal damage and genetic effects would be confined to the generation of people that were irradiated and that it would not be inherited to future generations. And he said, but it turned out that this was wrong. Can you
Yeah,
believe that?
absolutely.
I
No,
mean,
that is unbelievable. That's absolutely shocking.
I mean, it's it is shocking, it's horrifying, and it's terrifying. And unfortunately, this is that radiation is no respecter of person. So regardless of who you are, if you are irradiated, if you're exposed to radiation, you can carry on genetic defects to your offspring.
Absolutely right. And just to emphasize that point, if I may, so radiation, it's not just affecting yourself. It will also affect, if you have kids, any offspring that you have, and then quite possibly their offspring as well. So, like you said earlier, radiation is a multi-generational affector.
Right, it is no respecter of person. It knows no boundaries, no geographical boundaries, and it doesn't respect anybody.
I think it's quite fitting that plutonium is named after the god Pluto, the undergod, the god of the underworld.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we've been through these slides. I want to apologize. We got a little bit of a technical difficulty. Okay, so children are extremely vulnerable to nuclear radiation.
Is it
And
true that they are more susceptible than adults?
oh yes, absolutely. And women are more susceptible than men.
Oh, really?
Adult women are more susceptible than men. Yeah. So for every 2 men who get cancer, 3 women get cancer.
Crikey.
Yes. And here it is referring to the Beer studies, Beer 7. It's been common knowledge that children's bodies are the most vulnerable to radiation impacts, but from Beer 7, we also learned that little girls aged 0 to 5 years are twice as likely to suffer harm from radiation. And here it's defined as cancer, but we know that radiation can cause a multitude of health issues.
That's right.
So more likely to suffer from harm from radiation when compared to little boys in the same age group. And you can find that at this website. And if I close out of here, let's see, it's going that we can go to, let's see if I have that pulled up here. Yeah, okay.
So why should you looking for that? So again, just to clarify what you're saying, so that young girls are doubly as likely to have effects from radiation as young boys, and children generally are more susceptible to the effects of radiation than adults. So what we're doing with radiation, and I guess you could incorporate nuclear waste with that, or indeed nuclear fallout or background radiation, is what we're doing is we're subjecting our future children, the future guardians of our planet, with this multi-generational source which is going to affect them and attack them and essentially kill them. So what are we doing with nuclear waste and nuclear background radiation? I mean, we're almost condemning our future children to a life of defects and of mutations and essentially of death. I mean, this is inherently evil, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, it is, and it's in the fact that we have professionals, for lack of a better word, trying to stifle anyone that has a voice that is calling attention to the fact that, yeah, radiation is damaging, and radiation is not the, the green, clean, answer to, green source, climate change. It's not the answer to climate change, right?
Right.
Because it's very dirty from the mining process, and
it's certainly not a renewable source of power. And it's certainly not a clean energy source of power, like you say.
No, it's not. And I saw, and I didn't include it in the PowerPoint, but it was about it was a village in India.
Yeah.
And like all the children had some sort of genetic mutation, some sort of genetic defect. Where they were talking about they had like alligator skin, like one side of the body would grow, and the other side was like didn't. So they were walking around with lopsided, and quite the variety. And this was just from uranium mining being nearby. So we know that radiation is invisible, and that we can't see it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, we can't touch it. But guess what? Our chromosomes and our cells recognize it, and they know that it's there. Now, with that being said, there are ways that you may be able to block radiation, but the fact is that each radioactive isotope has a specific nutrient that it requires in order to block it. And at some point in time, we'll go more into detail on that subject. But today we are just focusing on the Mutant Daisy Foundation.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for that.
And we want to talk about how the children are the most at risk to radiation. Now, recently, Arnie Gunderson did a report, and he was talking about how he saw these girls riding their bikes to school, and that Minnemosa City was just being recontaminated, that it had been cleaned up, but it was being recontaminated when it rained and when it snowed. The fallout was coming down and contaminating the streets and the parks and everything. And he was saying that girls are 20 times more likely to be affected by radiation than boys.
And that was just backed up by the study that you just showed,
Yeah.
especially the PS study. But also for people that don't know, around Fukushima Daiichi plant, you have mountains. So the mountains would have absorbed a lot of radiation, and they're still getting bombarded with radiation. But whenever it rains, the rainwater will come down the mountains and wash the radiation back down into the river and back down into the towns and cities surrounding them. So these girls, I presume, and any children are going to be playing in these areas, which are going to be continually affected by radiation fallout. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's in this business about the ice wall. Don't get me started. Okay, it's a fantasy.
We won't go there.
It's just some sort of fantasy. It's just ridiculous. Okay, so radiation not only includes cancer and leukemia, and we know that Kevin Blanch, who is a tireless anti-nuclear activist who travels around the world, has leukemia, right? And
Sure.
He actually believes that his father was exposed to radiation during the nuclear testing out in Utah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, and then he says he also ate tuna, and of course tuna spawns off the coast of Japan. So if
That's
you
a good point. I was going to say to a listener, please don't eat any tuna that's caught in the Pacific Ocean.
Oh yeah, actually, if you go to one of my older blog posts on nuclearworld.net, you'll see there's a list of, and I can't tell you which blog post it is, there's a list that was done in 2012 by the Canadian government, and there's a list of like a bunch of different fish, and they were all contaminated. I mean, like in really high amounts, like anywhere between the low 80s to the high 90s%. And tuna is especially vulnerable because of the fact that it spawns off the coast of Japan.
And it's also a migratory species, isn't it? So
Yeah.
It can swim over to the west coast of the states, that is, and be caught. But again, just so that if anybody isn't quite aware, is it correct in saying that once you've ingested, once you've eaten a particle, you won't be able to get that out of your body? Is that right?
No, not necessarily. It depends. There's something called a biological half-life, and it just depends. Like if you it just depends on what you
It depends on
ingest.
the type of, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
but even so, none of it's good to eat.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, like alpha emitters, that's what they say they did to that Russian spy in the UK.
Litvienko.
Yes, and then also there's some evidence. They found polonium-210, which is an alpha emitter. They found some of that stuff like a year later. It showed up on Arafat's toothbrush. And then, yeah, it was found like also on his headscarf and in his underwear and stuff. So they're saying that, that was the cause of his demise, which is tragic. So that's an alpha emitter. So that just irradiates your innards. But there's like, for instance, like, a lot of these, I saw that video recently about that girl that was diagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, that beautiful Japanese girl. And
that was done by a chap called Documentarian, I believe.
yes, and and then of course, the same things that we saw in Chernobyl are going to happen in Fukushima, because, like I said previously, radiation is no respecter of persons. And they have the women that had their thyroid removed, they call it their Chernobyl necklace, because it leaves a scar there.
Right.
On your throat. But it also causes reduced immunity, reduced fertility or infertility. Like tritium can cause infertility. I met this lady. She used to live near Love Canal, and she told me she had something like 4 or 5 miscarriages before she was able to conceive.
It's so tragic.
Yeah, I know. And I told her, I said, it was probably the tritium. But she moved out of the area, and she's got kids now, and they're fine.
Also, before you continue, if I may, just people know, there is something like 9 million barrels of tritium infected water actually sat on the Fukushima Daiichi site, which they managed to capture, but they can't take tritium out of the water. So they're talking about releasing that into the Pacific Ocean as well, TEPCO. And tritium, as you just mentioned, is another evil isotope substance.
Yeah, and the problem with tritium, and we're going to talk about tritium in some of these other slides that I have set up, is that it's radioactive water. There's some low-tech ways you can get tritium out of the water, like by freezing it, because tritium has a different freezing temperature from regular water, non-radioactive water, and and they talk about, global warming and the ice caps are melting and all this. And it's like, well, you know what? Tritiated snow, uh, tritiated water, precipitation freezes at almost 5, not quite, but somewhere between 4 and 5. I don't remember, it's like 4 point something. I don't remember the exact. It's like almost 5 degrees Celsius higher than regular water.
Frankly.
Yeah, so that could account for the quote unquote climate change issue on these mountains where the water, the snow is melting. Is it? Isn't it? I don't know. Somebody needs to go up there and do a study and write a report and
Let's have some independent testing
yeah,
to verify this stuff.
yeah,
Come on, people.
yeah, exactly. And don't tell, if you're doing it, don't tell anybody what you're doing. Keep it secret until
You've got
until
the
it's
results,
published
yeah.
time. Yeah, because somebody
Yes.
will try and stop you.
Absolutely.
So it also causes heart disease and birth defects, including heart birth defects, and other mutations that are caused by heredity and some that are not. And it's absolutely very catastrophic to the developing embryo. It causes miscarriages, that's spontaneous abortion, and miscarriage of pregnancy, and that's if you're lucky.
And I believe it also could well cause deformities to the unborn baby as well. Is that right or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be almost anything. It's kind of like a crapshoot, depending on what when the mother was exposed to it, the radiation, what radioactive isotope she was exposed to, or isotope she was exposed to, and how long was it in her body, the biological half-life, and that sort of thing. There's a lot of factors that go in there. How strong was the dose? This was my Dr. Rosalie Bertel. She's like my role model, and she died. She's dead. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. She wrote No Immediate Danger. If you can get your hands on a copy of that book, that would be a really great resource to have in your library. Gender mechanism, okay, she talks about, this lady, she just brings up so many issues that, when she was talking about this back in the 80s, it's so timeless. The same issues are still pertinent today. She talks about gender, right? So that's like a big issue here, like women, equality, and all that business in the States here. And she's saying that it has a large impact on the outcome of the exposure of the radiation. And she's saying that that the female body, as we mentioned previously, that the reproductive tissues are more sensitive to radiation than the male body. But she's also saying that that there's a bias there, that this research isn't really being fully carried out because men aren't being directly impacted as strongly as women. So that's something that we all need to be aware of.
Definitely,
because
I think definitely need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're not a female, if you're a man, you still have mothers, you still have sisters, you have wives, you have daughters.
Absolutely.
So this is just a repeat of information that we have. It just says that males of all ages are more resistant to radiation exposure than females, and that children are more vulnerable than adults, and that the standard should be 0 because there is no safe dose of radiation. And Rosalie Bertel has a lot to say about the issue of the quote-unquote permissible dose.
That's right. And again, just to reiterate, no amount of radiation is safe.
Absolutely. Now we're going to shift gears here and talk a little bit about how the Japanese people are suffering from radiation sickness. And there's, they have that secrecy law that's been in effect for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're finding is, I believe this is from Arnie Gunderson's site. What they're telling us is that if a doctor puts that his patient is suffering from radiation illness on the hospital form, the government refuses to pay. So doctors are going out of business because they're doing their job, they're treating people, and there's a huge spike in the death rates within the Fukushima prefecture for young children when it's compared to what it was in previous years, and that information has been stifled by the Japanese medical community and government agencies, and nobody's publishing the data, but it was being published for years leading up to and before the disaster. And Arnie has something very significant to say about this, and he's saying if you control the medical community and the epidemiological data, then it's impossible to prove the case.
Yeah.
And with the secrecy law in effect, that just makes it almost impossible.
Right.
And and I showed you that before. We talked about how radiation is invisible, and that, but your chromosomes and your cells, you can see the damage that it does under the microscope.
Absolutely.
And we talked about this as well, that children's bodies are small, their cells are dividing very rapidly, they're growing exponentially, and so the same amount of radiation delivers a larger dose than it would for a full grown adult. And since their bodies are growing, their cells are dividing quickly, and their DNA is more likely to be damaged. And when their cells divide, and then the mutation, the damage, the DNA damage is replicated over and over and over again. So this is a pretty serious issue.
It's very serious. I don't know anything more serious than what's going on over there at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, some nights, to be honest, I just want to sob, because
it is so tragic.
It really is. I know that sounds like really, really weak, but yeah, it's just.
I don't think it is weak. I think it shows that we're human, and I think it shows that you're human, and it's a human emotion. Empathy is it's ingrained in humans, and I think that's also part of why Mutant Daisies got set up, because we feel for the people. We feel for the people of Japan that are exposed to this radiation, and the suppression of information that's coming out is unprecedented, to be honest with you. I think it's a human emotion that we want to help, certainly from Mutant Daisies' perspective, and that's why why you almost sometimes feel like crying. I've certainly sat up many a night horrified by what I read and my research and what I find, and some of the people I speak to in Japan, and some of the first-hand accounts of what's going on there. And again, sorry to interrupt, but you have mothers over there that are being forced to take their children back to school, where around the playground of the school you have such high levels of radiation that in any other country, it would be an exclusion zone. So
Yeah.
to have you to put your children into school and take them to school in such vast amounts of radiation is essentially condemning them to death. Okay, now it might not be straight away. It might be 5 years. It might be 20 years. But it's just evil. It's just inherently evil to have to send your. Can you imagine send your children, or even put yourself into a situation or an area which is highly irradiated, and means that when these children ingest these hot particles or radioactive particles, it's going to cause health defects, health problems, and it may well and probably will lead to cancers later on in life. It is absolutely abhorrent.
And for thousands of generations to come, if they survive.
Well, this is
and
it.
And they have
Generational defects
yeah.
and problems.
Yeah, and what concerns me is the callous attitude that the Japanese government has. But even in here in the States, it's just like a level of ignorance. It's like I get so frustrated when I talk to people here. They have like no idea what's going on, and when I spoke to a Christian friend of mine, and she was right on. All this is predicted in the Bible, but I refuse to passively sit by and while people are suffering and just be like, oh, well, Jesus is coming. Yes, we know he's coming, and the days will be shortened for the elect's sake, but, you know, faith without works is dead. So to just passively sit by and not do anything and let our Japanese brothers and sisters suffer is just unacceptable as far as I'm concerned.
I completely agree.
So the next topic we want to move on to is tritium, and we touched on it a little bit earlier. So basically, tritium is radioactive water, and so the water is two H2O, right? Two hydrogen atoms and one, no, H2O, right? So two hydrogen and one oxygen atom, right?
Correct.
So when it becomes tritium, it's an H3O, three hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. And so the thing is you can absorb it directly into your body. It's near, like a reverse osmosis. Like I'm always going up to the machines here and getting reverse osmosis water, and the reverse osmosis filter isn't going to filter it out. We have Brita here in the States. That's not going to filter, certainly not going to filter it out. We have fracking. Don't even get me started on fracking. We should do a whole thing on fracking. And, that's the proprietary slurry that they use when they do the drilling for fracking is they won't release it, not even, it's a secret, quote unquote, secret proprietary formula that they won't even release to first responders. So there are some reports saying that they are using radioactive isotopes, and all that is going into our groundwater. And in fact, here in the next county over and all over my state, I live in the state of Ohio, and they're just injecting fracking wastewater from all over the country here. And they're going to counties that are poor, and they're injecting it there. Because I'll tell you what, they won't be injecting it in the counties where there's money, okay? Because the people that have money are going to, they find out about it, they're going to be fighting it, right? So they go to these poor, low-income areas, and they take advantage of that situation. And it's really quite appalling.
That's right.
Okay, so I have a lot of information here. This is taken from the NIRS.org. They have a fact sheet about routine radioactive releases. And I don't think many people are aware of this, but nuclear power plants release radiation into the air, water, and soil all the time. And it's part of their routine daily operation. It's permitted, and there's really no accountability for these releases.
So that is, just to clarify, every single working nuclear power station in the world. We're not talking about nuclear power stations that have had an accident or had a meltdown or have had a situation. What we're talking about with routine releases is the routine procedure of every single working nuclear power station in the world releasing radioactive elements into the atmosphere and environment. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And as they age, it becomes an issue because there's something called radiation embrittlement. And basically the radioactive isotopes, what they do is they knock the electrons out of orbit. It doesn't matter what they come into contact with, whether it's your body or if it's the metal pipes in a nuclear reactor vessel. It causes it to embrittle and become weak, and they need to routinely be replaced, and that just isn't going on. And if it is, these pipes and tanks and valves are vulnerable to this radiation embrittlement, and that is also a source of contamination.
So when you have the fossil fuel industry being targeted, and quite rightly so, about obviously releasing elements into the atmosphere, coal-powered power stations, oil-powered power stations, gas-powered power stations. Obviously, they're releasing CO2 and other forms of fossil elements into the atmosphere. But what nuclear power stations often, or nuclear power companies often say, is that obviously they are not fossil emitters. Yet, what we're saying here, and what I know to be true as well, is they may not be emitting fossil fuels, or they may not be emitting fossil elements, but instead what they are emitting is radioactive isotope.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely beyond belief, and I don't think a lot of people realise that.
Yeah, and the most common one that's being released is tritium, but since there's really no accountability for it, we really don't know what's being released into the environment. In fact, Lyme, and I wrote about this in my blog, nuclearworld.net. They're saying Lyme disease came about because some ticks were exposed to some radioactive releases at the Hanford Little Neck nuclear power plant in Connecticut. And they're saying like that's where it came from, and it's quite possible that they mutated.
It's unbelievable. Well, I do believe it. I was going to say it's unbelievable, but no, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So they also intentionally remove some contaminant water from their reactor vessel to reduce the amount of radioactive and corrosive chemicals that damage the valves and pipes, and then the water's either filtered and recycled back into the cooling system or released into the environment. And again, these nuclear power plants are not being held accountable for anything that's being released into the environment. So your typical nuclear power plant releases has quite a requires a lot of water to keep the reactor vessel cool, to keep the nuclear fuel rods cool, and so it'll release the water. The discharge water is contaminated with radioactive elements, and which are not known because they're not required to monitor the water that's being discharged, but we do know that they are biologically active and that there are cases of mutations in the environment where these nuclear power plants are located.
Mm-hmm.
And also because the water is heated, it's also released into the atmosphere as vapor. And some of these radioactive fission gases are contained in decay tanks for days before released into the atmosphere through filtered rooftop vents. Now, are the vents being monitored? Are they being replaced? We don't know how much gets through. We don't know. Obviously, it's not being monitored, and that it's quite common that these radioactive gases build up and then they're purged and vented out into the atmosphere. And they go out into the atmosphere, they contaminate the air, they contaminate the soil, they contaminate the water.
They contaminate everything.
Yeah, pretty much, and that, yeah. And that's just assuming that everything is running, normally. Okay, this is normal operating procedure for these nuclear power plants. It's part of their routine operation to release radiation to the environment. And they may not be verified, they may not be documented, it just isn't required. So they really don't have any filtering or monitoring technologies to monitor tritium and radioactive gases such as krypton and xenon. And the government regulations allow radioactive water to be released into the environment, saying, this, you can't see my fingers, but I'm doing like the quote unquote, doing the quote thing, quote unquote, permissible levels of contamination. And with these new PAGs, the amount of radiation that is permissible is absolutely appalling. And if you go to nuclearworld.net, and I wrote up a little piece on that as well. So just because it is quote unquote permissible does not mean it's safe.
That's right.
I mean, as far as, nobody asked me if it was, what the permissible level is. I would say 0 is a permissible level, okay?
Oh, no amount of radiation is safe,
Yeah,
is it? So,
exactly. Now, the NRC relies on self-reporting and computer modeling at these reactor operators to track the radioactive releases and their projected dispersion, okay? So basically, the monitoring data that is extrapolated, it's virtual, it's not real.
they make it up as they go along, I
Yeah,
feel.
yeah, yeah, basically. It's based on these models and projections, but there's really nothing there to monitor it and to say. So really, their accurate accounting of radioactive waste that's released into the air, water, and soil is just not available. Okay, and this includes uranium mines and mills, chemical conversions, enrichment and fuel fabrication plants, nuclear power reactors, radioactive waste storage pools, casks, and trenches. It's just, it just goes on and on and on, because they're creating all this radioactive waste, and there's no long-term storage solution.
There is no long-term storage solution, and this is, one of the major problems with nuclear, is that we're creating a substance of which we just don't know what to do with in nuclear waste. There is no viable option of how or where we can store it.
Right. I've even heard some people say just like, eject it into space. And, I don't know how feasible that is. I don't know if it's even possible, to be honest. So,
it's not a viable solution. Even if it was possible, we can't say it's a viable solution.
right.
I mean, what? We contaminated the planet, so let's contaminate space. I mean,
Right.
it's so illogical.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to want to start, injecting it into the ground like we do this fracking wastewater. They can only drill down to like a little over 8 miles, and then like the drill bits break off.
But
So,
even so, even if they did that, and even like what has done, with nuclear waste being stored underground or underneath the sea, well, the containment vessels of what we're storing the waste in are generally made out of what, steel or aluminum or some form of
concrete.
base metal,
Yeah.
of which the nuclear waste is going to far exceed the lifetime of. So it's going to seep into the environment eventually, one way or another, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And that radiation, and nobody's really talking about this radiation embrittlement issue. Radchick does talk about it, and when she talks about the Wigner effect with the flying, but nobody else has really broached this subject, and it's very difficult to find information about it. Actually, if you do a search, it's called radiation embrittlement. If you find any good information, please, shoot me a link, or shoot Tom a link. We're on Twitter. I'm at nuclearworld.net, and Tom is at
Newton Daisies.
Absolutely. Thank you. You can always reach
we,
us on Twitter.
I was going to say, just so everyone knows, we actually spell Newton Daisies as an MUTANTDAISYS, because mutations cause deformities, so we spell it in the same way.
Exactly. Yeah, I get that. I get that. So, so we have the economic pressures to reduce costs, right, on these nuclear power facilities.
Sure.
And so, their monitoring is unreliable, their reporting is basically non-existent.
They're self-governing, so they get to do their own thing.
I'm laughing, but it's not funny, right? And deferred maintenance, we have the radiation embrittlement issue. So, replacing all these pipes and valves and all these little bits and pieces inside a nuclear power plant.
And of course, the nuclear power stations get to determine what is supposedly safe and what isn't supposed to be safe. So we have a self-governing industry to a very large extent.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely do. And oh my gosh, and we need to talk about these PAGs, these new protective action guidelines. It's just criminal, absolutely criminal. So these reactors byproducts give off, you know, isotopes, right? That can have extremely long half-lives. And whenever you see a half-life, so for instance, we have on the screen, you can see it's highlighted in yellow. It says iodine 129 has a half-life of 60 million years. So you multiply that times 10, right?
It's so scary. I mean,
yeah.
The mind boggles. You know, I can't compute that in my head.
Yeah, I mean, it really is an extremely long time, and that's assuming it's a one-time event. And we know that in the case of Fukushima, it's just ongoing. It just goes on and on and on. Yes, absolutely. And that, as I mentioned previously, Dr. Petkow established that low-level radiation damages cells, tissues, DNA, other molecules, and it causes programmed cell death, which is basically your cells commit suicide, okay? And genetic mutations, cancer, leukemia, birth defects, reproductive issues, immune and endocrine system disorders. And the list just goes on and on. Even Dr. Helen Caldicott says that diabetes is caused by radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is a list of the resources that I found on tritium for the audience's convenience. So that pretty much wraps up everything I have to say. Is there anything else you want to add, Tom?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I appreciate the time of having us here, and moving forward, I think it's our intention to do a lot more broadcasts and inform, educate people about the realities of the nuclear industry. Certainly, I wanted to say thank you for highlighting the Mutant Daisies initiative. And again, just to further emphasize that, what Mutant Daisies is an educational and informative, information outlet. We can be contacted on Twitter at Mutant Daisies, or at the moment our internet WordPress site is mutantdaisies.wordpress.com. And of course, we'd love to be contacted if you have any questions or queries. And essentially, what we want to do is expose the lies that are currently in existence about Fukushima, and indeed about Chernobyl and the nuclear industry as a whole. Certainly, as we move forward, we will look to sort of fine-tune our broadcasts, and certainly from my perspective, I'm sorry if we've had any slight technical issues today. We'll get them ironed out for you guys, and we can also be contacted at Mutant Daisies, which is our email address is Mutant Daisies. Again, I'll spell that MUTANTDAISYS @gmail.com. That's our generic email. Feel free to pop us an email if you have any questions or queries. And certainly, Martin, thank you very much for creating this, and I look forward to moving forward.
And as do I. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our show, and we look forward to communicating with you in the near future.